We want to bring into this conversation Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. He is a member of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Schiff, welcome to the State of Play.
It's great to be with you. Congratulations on the show.
I'm grateful for you making time to talk to us today. First of all, if I can ask you specifically, Attorney General Blanche declared that that fund is dead. He said it multiple times. You allege, of course, that the administration is using workarounds right now, that they continue to do so. Do you have any power to stop these payouts from happening?
Well, the first thing we need to do is to expose what's happening. And this is the genesis of the letter that we sent to the Justice Department. Blanche has made it pretty clear. He thinks these people should get paid. Of course, the president wants them paid. And much as Blanche insisted that the fund was dead, when he was asked by a federal judge to put in writing that the fund wouldn't be resurrected under a different name or another method found to pay out these same kind of violent insurrectionists, he refused to put that in writing. He refused to put that under oath. And of course, that raises profound questions given what we already know, and that is they have used Justice Department funds to pay off the president's cronies, people like Mike Flynn, who in the first Trump administration repeatedly pled guilty to lying to FBI agents. They made that case go away, and now they've paid him $1.25 million out of taxpayer funding.
Right.
And lawyers for some of these insurrectionists say they're planning to bring hundreds of cases as a workaround to get money for these violent cop beaters.
What is the danger of the DOJ, the Justice Department, operating like this?
Well, it's rewarding people who use violence on behalf of the president. It is abusing taxpayer dollars. It is also, I think, enabling the Justice Department to lie to Congress in order for Blanche to get confirmed, to promise one thing, but behind the Congress's back to do something very different. So, I think they'll probably stonewall us until we flip one or both houses in the midterms. And then we will have leverage to get answers, and not just answers to how they may be using and abusing taxpayer funds to pay off people who assaulted police officers, but a whole host of other questions they refuse to answer, like whether Tom Homan took some tens of thousands of dollars in a paper bag and what happened to that money. And, of course, the whole range of questions about Epstein files that are still withheld from the public and more. So I look forward to that oversight.
I want to ask you, if I can, about one of those levers that you would have if Democrats are able to recapture the House. Obviously, that would likely lead to the launching of many investigations. But Attorney General Blanche, in his first action, announced that he would, in effect, be protecting the communications between President Trump and his private advisors there. You know well how these investigations go. You were on the January 6th committee. What would that do to your ability to investigate some of these cases?
Well, this is, I think, the reason why the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department, which used to be an independent office to give independent advice to the executive branch, but has now become just another partisan tool of the president, put out that opinion a few days ago saying that a much broader category of documents, communications between the president and other agencies, would now be protected from disclosure. This is a prophylactic measure to avoid oversight. This is why it's going to be so important for us to control the power of the purse, because Republicans have been unwilling to insist on getting answers to any legitimate oversight question. But with the power of the purse and the power to cut off funds to Blanche and his office, we will be able to demand answers. And I think it's vitally important that we do.
And Senator Schiff, just this morning, the White House said that it would be going to the Supreme Court after lower courts, or the DOJ, but the White House, this administration, said it would be going to the Supreme Court after lower courts ruled against the president's ballroom construction. Yesterday, the Trump-aligned board of the Kennedy Center approved a resolution that would inscribe the president's name on the building beneath the main signage. This is after he had previously lost in the courts. Do you have faith that the courts in this country will be able to stand up to the president's sort of aggressive and ambitious legal maneuvers?
I do have confidence in the lower courts. I think we've seen a lot of independence and devotion to the rule of law in lower courts. But of course, the president is counting on the people he put on the Supreme Court to do his bidding. And most of the time, they're willing to do it. They're willing to give him all kinds of power that previous presidents haven't had. The only exceptions seem to be when it comes down to affecting the moneyed interest behind these Supreme Court justices and their appointments. So I think on things like tariffs or firing the members of the Federal Board of Reserves, they will go where the money is instead of go where the president is. But letting the president abuse taxpayer dollars to build his golden ballroom, and the fact that he has lied about it to the country and said no taxpayer dollars were going to be used, what I would call now a golden lie behind that ballroom. I don't know that the Supreme Court is willing to say no to the president on things like that. We will have a reckoning. There will be an accounting, and I would frankly like to see one day that the Justice Department try to recoup those funds that were improperly spent by the president, already probably hundreds of millions on that golden ballroom.